Hey man, sorry, I know you're in the middle of a bunch of stuff, but can I just ask you a quick question?
Yeah, of course, no problem.
What day is it today?
It's Tuesday today.
Okay, yeah, no, sure, I get that, but like, what day is it?
It's the 3rd of December. It's Tuesday the 3rd.
Okay, sure. I'm not really getting it. What day is it? But, you know, with the
Oh, okay. You want me to do the thing?
Yeah, do the thing.
I get it. It's Tutorial Tuesday.
Okay, not quite what I was hoping for. Pretty low effort, to be honest. Maybe do the thing again.
It's Tutorial Tuesday.
Okay, look, I know you're busy, but do the thing, but like do it properly.
Okay. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where every single week, every single Tuesday, you get a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. Now this week, I went a little bit too hard on the fresh. Now this week, we're going to be talking about 10 tips that everyone should know about Lightroom, because there's so much to think about with Lightroom, and to be fair, you're generally concentrating on the actual edit of your photo. So we're going to go through 10 things that make it a little bit easier, maybe things that people don't really know, but really useful tools and useful things within Lightroom that not everyone knows about. So let's just dive straight in. So tip number 1 is using the angle tool to straighten your horizons. It's a really easy thing, but not everyone knows about it. Now, straight horizons are one of those things that sound really simple, but if they're off just a touch, it can be enough to just throw off the picture, and anyone looking at it might not fully be able to realize why they don't like it, but there's just something that they're not a big fan of. Now, if you're like me, like with this photo here, you might have been playing around with the crop tool, kind of rotating it till it looks about right. However, there is a much easier way of doing it. So when you open the crop overlay here, so you get this and you get this nice little overlay with your grid, you can see it says angle here, and we've got a little tool here. So let's go ahead and click that, and it allows us to actually draw a line to actually show the horizon. Now this is super easy. If you can see the horizon in your photo, like here we can just draw a line along the sea there. And there we go, done. It's just gonna use that as the horizon, rotate it perfectly, and now we've got a nice, perfectly straight horizon. Very easy to do, but makes a big difference to your photos. Okay, so tip number 2 is auto tone. Now, this is something that I didn't use for a long time with Lightroom, way into when I was really using it a lot. But it's actually something that sounds like it would be for kind of beginners, but to be honest, you can definitely use it as a seasoned veteran of Lightroom as well. It's essentially going to give you a starting point for how to edit your photo. So right here, I've got this photo here. Above all the kind of tone things like exposure, contrast, highlights, shadows, whites and blacks, all that kind of stuff, there is this little button here that says auto. And if you go ahead and click that, Lightroom's just going to analyze your photo and make some adjustments that it thinks are best for this photo. So usually it tends to bring the highlights down a little bit, boost the shadows. Contrast, it'll either go down or up, obviously, but it tends to do that based on the photo. And white's probably up a little bit, black's down a little bit. But what it does is it gives you a great starting point for editing your photo. So whether you intend to stick with that or not, it can be very interesting to see what Lightroom would do with your photo and then make further adjustments from there. It's absolutely not the be all and end all of your editing, but it does give you a great jumping off point to start with. Now, tip number 3 is all about checking the before and after. This is a really key part of editing. I find it incredibly useful because it allows you to see how far you've taken the image and have you over-processed it at all. Now, there's a few different ways of doing this. You can use keyboard shortcuts. So Y on your keyboard is going to give you a side-by-side of the before on the left and the after on the right. Using the backslash is going to allow you to cycle between before and after very easily, so you can just check them yourself. And then of course down here at the bottom left of the image, you've got a few options for how you want to view it. And if you click here where it kind of looks like it says Y and Y, it'll give you the side-by-side. But if you keep clicking, it'll give you interesting different side-by-side comparisons. So the next one is like this, where it's literally split down the middle. And then you can keep kind of clicking through, see them above and below, split horizontally as well. And then when you're ready, you can just click on the one on the left there, to see it back to normal. Now, tip number 4 is kind of a small one, but it's kind of a time saver, I find, which is that if you want to go back and reset some of the effects that you've been using, you don't have to bring the slider back to 0 or type 0 or anything like that. You can literally just double click on the effect. So in this photo, again, for example, let's say we want to bring the highlights back to where they were. We can just go over to highlights and just double click on the word highlights. Same with shadows, same with exposure, same with contrast. It works on all of them, and it's a really quick and easy way to just set those back to 0. Now, tip number 5 is all about not forgetting about the filters. So you've got a graduated filter, you've got the radial filter, and then you've got the adjustment brush as well. And these are incredibly useful for editing local parts of your image. So whether that's adjusting like the sky, or painting in one part of an adjustment with the brush, or using the radial filter to focus in on one area of the photo, they're a very, very powerful editing tool. Now, we've got a full video on editing using these. I'll pop a link to that down in the description so you can check that out. That's definitely worth having a look at because it goes into quite a lot of detail. But essentially, if we jump back into this same photo again, we can come up here to the graduated filter. Let's say we want to affect that sky a little bit. We can then affect the settings and then apply that as a graduated filter across the photo. So let's dial in a little bit of a reduction in exposure. Let's say about half a stop. That'll do. And let's just drag that in from the top left there. And then you can turn that on and off using this little icon here. Things like that and things like the radial filter are very, very useful for just allowing you to control what's going to be the focal point of your image and actually editing local parts of your image there as well. Now, sticking on the same subject, because I think most people probably know about those filters, but something that is very, very handy is using the range mask within those filters. So for example, the graduated filter we just applied, let's pop it back on. Let's pop it on this left-hand part of the sky and on another one coming in from the right. But you can see that it's darkened the actual cathedral there, which we don't want to do. We just want to darken the sky a little bit. Now, in this situation, we can come down to the bottom here to range mask, click off, and then you can select luminance. You can actually affect what part of the image it's going to be affecting. And in this case, we only want it to affect the brighter part of the image, the sky, as opposed to the cathedral, which is a little bit darker. So by adjusting this, we are adjusting what that filter is actually going to be affecting. Now you can see exactly what it's affecting by pressing O on your keyboard, and it's going to give you a nice red overlay to show you what parts of the image it's actually affecting. It's worth playing around with this range mask, because if we drag this up to here, so it's only affecting the top bit there, so the brighter parts of the image, you can see the red is on the sky behind, but it's not on the cathedral. If I press O again and adjust the exposure, you can see it's bringing that sky down, but it's or up, but it's not affecting the cathedral. So that can be a very useful way to mask out parts of your image. This works really well if you're trying to affect a sky and you've got a bit of a different skyline where you've got skyscrapers or trees or things like that, and you only want to be affecting the brighter part, which is that sky. Sticking with the filters though for a second, tip number 7 is about using them in a slightly different way to how you'd imagine. So let's go back into this photo here, which got a nice kind of sunset. Now, with the graduated filter, you would often use that to maybe adjust the sky, so we'd do something like this. But in this case, I don't want to do that. I want to do something slightly different. I'm going to pop the exposure back to 0 by double clicking, and I'm actually going to bring the warmth up and the color temperature. I'm going to bring the warmth up and a bit of exposure, and I'm going to bring that in from the top right to essentially simulate sunlight. And this is something that I do a lot, is actually bringing graduated filter, but with a slightly different color temperature. So either warm or cool tones. And this works so well in so many different situations. There are so many times when you can apply this. For example, this photo here, we can just drag it in from the top left, and it's just giving that slight kind of hazy sunlight. I mean, if we come back into this photo, instead of darkening the sky, we could actually bring, look at that. I mean, that's probably a bit overkill, but you know, then you can dial it back a bit, adjust it to what you think looks good, but it can really, especially in a sunset or sunrise kind of photo, can really work a lot of magic in your photo. And especially if you want to add what looks like light coming from one direction, this is a great way of doing it. So tip number 8 is to explore the HSL tab. Now, we've talked about this before in other videos. This is where you can affect the hue, the saturation, the luminance, the various colors within your photos. You can actually affect the oranges individually, or the yellows, or the blues, or the purples, and keep going like that. It's very, very useful, but we tend to focus on hue and saturation. We don't tend to look at luminance as much, but it can be a very, very useful tool when you're editing your photo. For example, back here in this photo, we've brought the highlights way down. But if we didn't want to do that, if there were different things we wanted to do, we could come into the luminance here in the HSL tab, and we could actually bring the blues down. And you can see by doing that, we're bringing the sky out underneath those clouds. Now we could then combine that by bringing the highlights down a bit. But now what we've got is a situation where the blues are really punching through. You can then combine that with a bit of saturation. But if we turn off the HSL tab here, that sky is not nearly as punchy when we don't bring the blues down. By bringing the blues down, we're affecting the blues up in the top right, the top left, but also in the cloud here. If I turn it off again, you have a look at that, that's crazy. So this is something you want to be a little bit subtle about. You can see sometimes the color starts to break up a little bit. So you don't want to go too crazy with it, but it can make a big difference to your photo. It can add a lot to your photo. And just experimenting and exploring what you can do by playing around the luminance of the different colors. You know, you can also boost the luminance of something like the orange. So if you wanted to have, you know, a much brighter sky there where the sun is, but it's still not kind of blown out. You've still got the details of the clouds and things like that. You can do that using the luminance tab. So that's a really important thing that I think probably doesn't get explored enough. We tend to focus on the hue and the saturation, but there's the luminance as well. So tip number 9 is all about using the grid overlay in different ways. So when you come up here to the crop overlay to crop your image, you get this grid which gives you a nice kind of rule of thirds kind of look to it, so you can actually crop your image so that it's going to compositionally look best. While in this mode, if you press O, you can actually get some different grid overlays, and they give you different perspectives on the image. And that allows you to crop for different types of composition. There's all kinds of different ones in here, some which are very, very useful. You know, some that show you what the image will look like in certain different crops if you go for that kind of crop. So for example, here we can see what it looked like 5x7, 4x5, 2x3. Which I think is really, really useful. And it just gives you a slightly different look to things than just the standard kind of rule of thirds grid overlay. And then lastly, tip number 10 is about isolating your photo so you can better kind of judge what you think of it and what you think of the edit that you've had. So when you're looking at your photo, if you press L, it's going to dim everything around the photo to kind of dark gray. If you press it again, everything else goes black. Now that allows you to just focus on the photo without the distracting elements around it and actually see what you think of the edit, what it looks like standing by itself, isolated as a photo. And then of course you just press L to go back to the normal view. It can be really helpful to just check your photo like that, because sometimes it can be so easy to get lost with all the Lightroom stuff all around the photo. It can be nice to actually view it isolated and just sit with it for a second. So those are our 10 tips for Lightroom that I don't think everyone knows about. I think some of those are really quite useful. And when I first learned a lot of these, I did find them very, very handy. A lot of them I use all the time just because they are very, very useful. But if you have any tips of your own, make sure to pop them down in the comments. I always love reading through those. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it as well, because that's always really helpful. It helps me out a lot. Make sure to subscribe as well if you're new, because there's new stuff all the time. Tutorials every Tuesday. But right now to the 24th, like I mentioned at the beginning, there's a new video every single day. Every single day, and I've not filmed them. I've not filmed them all at all. So by all means, pop something down in the comments if you want to see anything from now to the 24th of Christmas. If it's Christmas themed, all the better, but anything else will do as well. I will see you tomorrow for more content, and as always, thanks for watching.